Let's create a brand new HTML file, new file, and let's call this save as, let's call it HTML inputs.html. And then go ahead and type HTML and then down arrow to the HTML5 and press enter. And it brings in a bunch of data for us already. I can go ahead and I could have kept that, or I'll just clean it up a little bit for video's sake. And by the time I did that, I could have just typed it all in. But anyway, you can see there's a little trick, HTML, and then you can down arrow and choose one of those options and it will pre-fill your page. Let's work some more with HTML forms. In the first video, we talked about what an HTML form was. And we talked about that it can be a container and it can hold other information, other HTML tags, and we mainly use those HTML forms so that we can let the user interact with us. So let's go ahead and create an HTML form, and let's give it an ID, and we'll call it my form input. I like to use camel case if I can type correctly. And let's give it a name. We'll just call it my form. I could have called it the same. And let's go ahead and save that. And in our form, let's go ahead and create a label object. Remember that the label tags, they allow us to attach a label to other HTML tags that we want to work with. And so let's go ahead and set a label tag, and let's do a drop down list. So let's go ahead and say label for equals, and we're going to call that drop down list fave ice cream. And in the label itself, we'll type in favorite ice cream. And then we want to do a drop down list now. The way you do a drop down list is that it is a select tag. So you say the word select. Let's go ahead and give it an ID. We'll call it fave ice cream, because that's the link now between this label and this drop down list. And let's go ahead and give it a name, and I'm going to go ahead and give it the same name. Whoops, give it the same name as the ID. And then within that drop down list, if you want items to show up when they click on the drop down, we do that through the word or the tag option. And then you can just type in the text for the option. And so we have vanilla, strawberry, and we have chocolate. And that closes off our drop-down list. And so that right there is a way that you can make a drop-down list with a label. If I went ahead and saved that and executed this, I don't have anything else on the form yet. All I have is the drop-down list. There's my drop-down list. So how do you do it? You do it with the select tag and then options. And the options are the drop-downs. What else could we do in an HTML? Let's do a radio button. And we're going to see how we can grab data out of all these in just a little bit. So the way you work with radio buttons, let's go ahead and put a label in. But in this case, I'm not going to attach the label to anything. I'm just going to type in some text. Love popcorn, question mark. And in a radio button, the way we work with that is we can do another label, and we'll say for, and let's attach it to an ID called popcorn yes, and that'll be the word yes. And there's different ways to do this. You don't have to use a label when you do the radio buttons. It's just a way that you can create a label object so you can access it later. Now a radio button is done by using the input and specifying the type to be radio. And we'll go ahead and give it a name, and we'll call this name Popcorn Lover, and let's give it an ID of popcorn yes, and a value of Y. I could have said yes. I could have put a value you bet. This is whatever you want the system to return if they choose that radio button. If I choose this, it'll return a Y. If I choose it, it'll return the word yes. If I choose it, it will return the word yowzer. So that's what value is for a radio button. And let's go ahead and put another radio button. And I'm just going to copy and paste. But the difference, we're going to say this is for the popcorn no, spelled correctly. And the label inside will be no. And then if you notice, I'm going to go ahead and leave the name of the radio button Popcorn Lover. I'm going to change the ID and I'm going to change the value. But by leaving the name the same, that's what makes a radio button group. And it makes it mutually exclusive, meaning you can only click on one radio button at a time. Only one can be selected. As long as they're all part of the same group, which we call the name, only one button can be selected. Now, if they were different names, they could both be selected. So that's how we can work with the radio button. You just specify radio, make the names the same. If you want them to be in a group, meaning yes and no are mutually exclusive, there can be only one. And let's go ahead and do a checkbox. And once again, we're going to start with the label, and we'll specify the for on it, and we'll call it free treat. And do you want free treats? Now in a checkbox, it has an on or off stage. Now checkboxes are not mutually exclusive, meaning you can have a bunch of checkboxes checked at any one time. And let's go ahead and do an input on that one, and we'll specify the type equals checkbox. And let's give it a name. We'll call it free treat, which matches our for, but at the same time we're going to go ahead and give it the same ID also, because that's what we really go off with of our for in the label. And on this checkbox we can go ahead and give it a value of Y, meaning if you check on it, that's going to be a yes, and we'll see if it's automatically checked or not. Now let's go ahead and save this and just take a look and see what our form looks like so far. So here's our drop down, here's our radio, yes, no. Do you see it's mutually exclusive? And I said value yes. That's only if it's checked though. So we'll uncheck it, uncheck, and of course I think we're going to go back and add some breaks in between all those. So that's what they look like so far. Let's add some breaks in between these inputs so far, so they're not all jammed together. Alright, so now we have a drop down list, radio buttons, and a checkbox. Let's go ahead and do another break, and let's learn what a password does. There's the label. I just said for the my password ID, we're going to have enter your password. And now let's go ahead and do the input. And on this one, you're going to specify the type being password. And we'll give it a name. And we'll give it an ID. Remember, those are ways that we can use those names and that ID to access them later on in the DOM. Now another thing we can do on this password is we can give it a max length, 8, meaning the most characters they could type in that field would be 8. And we can use this max length on other HTML tags that we've worked with, like the input text. Another cool one we can do on all of these HTML tags is we can specify required, and you just say required. And so now if they don't type in their password, the system can come back and say, hey, you've got to type something in there. Let's go ahead and run this. We'll save it and execute it so you can see what the password looks like now. Down here in the password, enter your password. Hello. Notice it's automatically masked for us. And you can specify your own mask, but you're going to have to learn how to use what they call patterns. Let's come back and let's go ahead and also add another item. Let's go ahead and do a date field. So I paused the video and typed in my label. There's my label. It's going to be for the ID, my date. It'll say enter your birth date. And then on the input, we're going to specify the type equals a date. We're just going to do date. We're not going to worry about time or anything like that. Now there's an interesting attribute that we can add on a date. Let's go ahead and give our names first. And we'll call it my date, and the ID will be my date. And the interesting attribute is you can specify a min date. So let's say 2010-01-15. And let's see what that does when we run this. So we specified the min date for that date calendar to be 10-1-15. Let's take a look. Here's our date input. I can click on it. And let's see how far down I can go. I can go up, heading back the other way. That's the lowest I can actually go now in that calendar. So that means that we have the ability to specify on that date object maybe what the min is, what the max is. We can even specify where to start if we wanted to do that in our HTML. And all we would have to do is come into our little date tag and say the word value equals, and then let's say 2019-03-09. Let's go ahead and save that. And remember, we could also have put a max, like what's the furthest date that we want our system to be able to handle. So now when I come in here, there's our default date, and that's our date input. So how do we actually work with these? Well, let's go ahead and add a couple of breaks, and then we're going to add a button. So let's just do an input type equals button. And on our button, let's give it a value. We'll say it's saved data will be our text on the button. Let's give it an ID, btn save, and when you click on this button, we want to go ahead and process data. This will be a JavaScript function that we're going to write. Process data. Oops, let's get the typos out of there. And so now what we have to do is we just need to come and write the script for that JavaScript function. So we'll just say function process data, and then in here we can go ahead and build that information. Now before we do that, let's go ahead and outside of the form, what if we can do this? Let's just create a p tag. We'll say ID equals output. And so it's actually outside of the form. And let's put a couple breaks there, or we'll just put one break. And then what we want to do is we want to build some text. S output equals quote, we'll initialize it, and then we want to go and grab the information from that form and display it, or build it to this output and then display it. So how do we get information off of the form? Let's go ahead and create some variables to hold the data. Var s ice cream, that will hold the data from the drop down. Var s popcorn, that will hold the data from the radio button. Var s treats, That will hold the button or the data from the checkbox. Var s password. That's from our password tag. And var s date. Now let's see why I'm making everything variables, and I'm implying just through Hungarian notation that they're going to be strings. We'll see what happens. So now let's go and grab the data. How do we do that? Var, well, we already had our var. S ice cream is equal to, let's go and access the DOM, and then on the DOM let's access the forms, and then you specify in quotes the name of the form. So if I come back up here, we can see the name of the form is called my form. So let's come back down here, we grab the name of the form, put it into there, and that now returns the form object. In the form object itself, we want to go and grab the different items that we have in our form. And so let's specify the drop-down list, which we called fave ice cream. And then we want to access the value out of that object. Let's see what would happen if we did this. Let's save this and let's go ahead and run it. But this time when we run it, I want to go ahead and press Control-Shift-I to access the inspector, and I want to go ahead and look at the HTML, and I want to set a breakpoint on line 36. So currently vanilla, let's choose strawberry, let's click Save Data, which calls process data. Here's the document, here's all the forms. The name of the form is called My Form Input. Now that's interesting. I said the name of the form was My Form. But take a look at the code. It's really working with the ID and not the name of the form. So it's the ID attribute you specify, not the name attribute. So let's go ahead and close this, and we'll come back over to here, and we now know that's not the name attribute. We need that attribute. So you specify the document form, the ID, and then the tag you want to work with. Well, this makes me wonder then, is it the name or the ID? Let's try this. Here's our select. Let's just change this to be ice cream name. We'll save that, and let's run our debugger one more time. Execute it, and we'll do a Control-Shift-I, and let's go ahead and run that. Put our cursor on the forms. There's the form. The item, the select item, is called Fave Ice Cream. So once again, when you take a look at that name, you need to realize we think it's the name that we're pulling, but it's actually the ID. So remember that. It's the ID that we're pulling off, not the name of the object. We can go ahead and just leave that the way it is. And let's come back down to our form. That's okay. And let's get the rest of the data. S popcorn equals document dot forms bracket my form input, and then we want the name of the radio button. Well, now in this case, if we put the name and we say popcorn ID yes and popcorn ID no, that's not going to work for us. So we need this one to be the radio button name. So how do you learn this? Just by playing around and practicing. We'll grab the value out of that. Let's take a look at the treats. S treats is equal to the document forms my form input, and I think we called it free treat dot value. Let's do the password and specify its ID, which was my pwd dot value, And the last one will be sDate. And that will be, I think we called it myDate dot value. Let's go ahead and save this, and let's run it one more time. I want you to see what the data is inside. Control-Shift-I. Let's choose strawberry. Yes. Click it. Password will be hello. We'll leave that date. Click Save Data. And now let's step through the debugger. Take a look at each one of these. The date is a string. The password is a string. The treats says a Y, popcorn says a Y, ice cream says strawberry. So when you take a look back at what we had over here, if you notice, the radio button said Y or N. So we grabbed the Y because that was checked. We grabbed Y because it was checked. What would happen if it wasn't checked? Let's try that. Let's come back to our browser and we'll continue. Let's uncheck that. Let's check no. Let's leave that empty. Save data. Let's run it again. Step through it. Password is empty. We left it empty. Treats is a Y. Now, the interesting thing is we said it's not checked, but it's still Y. That's N. That's correct. So something's wrong with our treats. And that's because we said the value is a Y. But what we really want to know is whether or not it is checked or unchecked. So maybe on the checkbox, instead of worrying about a value, what we need to do instead is we can specify checked. And then in our code, where we say the treats and we just grab the value, instead of grabbing the value, we could do this. If the document.forms bracket free treat dot checked equal true. Then let's say sTreats is equal to yes. Otherwise, sTreats is equal to no. So what we're saying is the checked option will automatically put a check in the box. If you left checked off, that would be unchecked. And now, Control-Shift-I to look at our debugger. We come back over to here. Let's step through. Let's see if that works. Checked. And it says, yeah, it is checked because it's a checkbox. And so since it's checked, we can go ahead and do whatever we want now. We're just specifying treats is equal to Y. So that's how you work with a checkbox in HTML. What about the date? Currently, we said it's a string, right? It comes back a string. Maybe we don't want it to be a string. Maybe we want to say whatever they bring back, we add a year to it. So if we want to do that and convert a string to the date, then what we have to do is make a new object. And so we set our variable sDate, which probably shouldn't be sDate anymore, is equal to new. We called the date function, which says make a new object of type date. We pass it a string, which is what gets returned from that date HTML tag. And then we said, in this case, just to prove it's a date, let's go access the full year from the date. Notice I call the method, and that's because this now makes a date object. And since it's a date object, it now has methods. In fact, I can show you all of those. Look at all these different methods we have. We can get the month, the minutes, the hours. We'll just grab full year, but remember it's a method, so you have to do that. So let's go ahead and run it one more time and see if that works. And we'll look at the debugger. We'll step through it. Date is now 2019. Notice that it's a number. It's not a string. If it was a string, there'd be quotes around it. So that's how you can convert a date from the date input, take that string from the date input and make it a real date so that you can do whatever you want with it. So this is how you work with HTML forms and a bunch of the input types. There's other input types that are out there. There's numbers, there's ranges, there's files. So I would suggest you go Google those, play with them. And this allows you to get data into an HTML form, let the user type in data, and then you can do whatever you want with it. Later on, we're going to teach you how you can actually store that information out to maybe a database. Currently, we're just storing it in the local storage and then putting it into another web page. But there's anything you can do now that you have the HTML form and you're getting data from the user.